The best gaming console just got a major upgrade. 1080p, 1440p, CRT emulation, preset saving, and motion adaptive deinterlacing. It's beautiful! Everything I ever wanted. The launch of the PlayStation 2 was a huge deal around the globe. Like millions of other gamers, I patiently waited in line at my local game shop's midnight launch. We all hoped that night that the PS2 would deliver gaming experiences beyond our wildest dreams, and in many ways, it did. But we didn't know that it would go on to be the highest selling game console of all time, with over 158 million units sold and a library of nearly 2,000 games, providing some of the most unique and experimental gaming experiences ever released. And now, the console has finally been brought into the HD era with PixelFX's Retro GEM HDMI mod. Not only can you scale the entire PS2 library to HD, but since the PS2 is backwards compatible, you also get a free original PlayStation HDMI mod to play virtually all of those games in HD too. Two for the price of one. Well, we'll talk about pricing in a moment. Quality isn't the only factor though. Input latency matters a lot, and most TVs add a ton of lag to scale old systems up. HDMI mods help avoid that. There is a pretty big catch, and we'll get into it later. Opening the Retro GEM settings menu requires quite the button combo. L1, R1, D-pad right, and circle, but this means you'll virtually never open it on accident, which is great. Here you'll have granular control over the whole suite of scaling and video tuning. In the scaler menu, you have full control over zoom factors to crop off any black areas, aspect ratio control, and the type of scaling being done, sharp, smooth, and so on. You might want to tune this per game, as smooth scaling looks better in general on some 3D games with a mostly 3D focused console, or you can just leave it on sharp but not mess with it that too much. Your call. You also have fine tuning for pre-scale and phase, things I'm not even going to mess with right now. The deinterlacing menu gives you three options: bob, weave, and motion adaptive. This menu is crucial, as most of the PS2's library outputs in 480i, and deinterlacing is one of the biggest sources of blur and lag in modern displays and capture methods. Bob just shifts the plane up and down. It's the primary deinterlacing mode used in devices like the 2X RetroTink variants and the OSSC. But for my ADHD inability to ignore constant stimuli, the flickery nature is just super distracting, and I hate it. I never want to see it again. But it's lagless and it stays pretty sharp. Blend deinterlacing is what lots of older capture cards or TVs tend to do, and it adds input latency and overall just sucks. It basically looks like visual vomit because it blurs the fields together. It especially sucks for captures that are going to be streamed or compressed in videos. Lots of older PS2 game videos are ruined by this. Motion adaptive deinterlacing is the best way to handle this. It dynamically shifts deinterlacing modes and algorithms based on content. It looks clean and clear. It doesn't really impact input latency, and it avoids combing artifacts most of the time. This was the big selling point of the XRGB Mini FrameMeister back when it was the king of scalers, and it has since been implemented in the RetroTink 5X, the GBSC AIO, and most recently in the PCSX2 emulator, right after my video about it. Always use motion adaptive. The RetroFX menu lets you apply CRT emulation, features for scan lines, masks, color settings, and other ways to tweak the visuals to better look like they're being played on an old CRT TV. Something OLED TVs play really nicely with, and just helps keep visuals how they were mostly intended to look on consumer displays at the time. There's a slot mask generator to make your own CRT masks just the way you like it, and they even have a web UI for this, so you can make your own custom slot masks on a computer where you have way easier and better control, and then just download it to your Retro GEM, which is pretty neat. And of course, there's the output resolution menu, arguably the most important one. Options range from 480p to 1440p. 480p has both TV and VGA options. There's a 960p option and a 1600 by 1200 option, which is great for older TVs and monitors to get more crisp native video on those, or for outputting to PC CRT monitors. 720p and 1080p are output in 16:9 with pillar boxing to be most compatible with HD and 4K displays. These modes are perfect for TV play, capture, streaming, and so on. The 1440p mode has a caveat that it outputs in 4:3 native at 1920 by 1440 resolution. This is great just to have a higher resolution option if you want to use it, and it looks great in capture, and lots of 4K OLEDs have a direct 1440p mode that feels great. But this comes at the cost of compatibility. Not all displays or capture cards will support this niche, basically never used format. 4:3 is not around anymore, despite what I may wish for. At worst, it won't display anything at all. At best, it'll stretch it out to 16:9 if you are having compatibility issues, and that will be a pain to squish back without quality loss. Plus, this requires some funky work to make it usable with widescreen modes in games that support it too. This was an issue for the RetroTink 5X at launch too. I mentioned that with the special 6X mode, that it was working in 4:3 mode and had some capture card compatibility and stuff, though Mike G did eventually add a 2560x1440 output mode to it. Regardless, I wanted to test with capture cards to see what you're looking at. I will mostly point you to the section of my video for the RetroTink 5X to talk about capture card compatibility, but in a nutshell, most USB capture cards, even from Magewell, will not detect this at native 1920x1440 resolution. Instead, it will only pull it in at 2560x1440, which means it stretches it out and you'll have to use the scaling aspect ratio filter in OBS with the area scaling mode to squish it back to 4:3, which could cause potential extra artifacting or quality degradation. Honestly, my recommendation for streaming purposes is to just go with the 1080p mode, scale it up to whatever resolution you're streaming at. Most of you that will be 1080p anyway, and you'll have the native 4:3 or whatever you're scaling out of the PS2 HDMI and not have to worry about it. Like, normally I would advocate for the highest resolution, but with the compatibility concerns in mind, and where even Magewell USB cards aren't playing nice, my Blackmagic Decklink Quad HDMI, which supports 1440p, just completely glitches out when I do this mode. I just, pretty much all my captures in this video were 1080p, and that's what I recommend most people stick with. I did briefly want to highlight two great things I love about this solution that makes me kind of set on having it alongside my analog flow. First is the Retro GEM's menus actually highlight the resolution each game runs at and what it ends up getting scaled to based on your output resolution. This is really cool to see just from a nerdy perspective, but if you were ironically using another device like the OSSC, the FrameMeister, the RetroTink 5X, it gives you the information you need to better calibrate phase and everything like that, such as from with Wobbling Pixels PS2 RetroTink settings video. It gives you that information and makes that a lot easier, which is, like I said, kind of amusing, but is really cool information to see, and then you can balance out what output resolution you want based on what it ends up getting scaled to, because often that's higher than 1080p. But also the HDMI output cleans up the signal, something that I have been complaining about with the PS2 forever, and people weren't sure that I knew what I was talking about. The PS2's analog output tends to lean towards a green shift or cast on it, and this is visible with the RetroTink 5X and the 2X, and I've seen it even with the FrameMeister. There's just this slight green tint that never quite felt right, and that is gone on the PixelFX Retro GEM. Like that, it is completely digital output, and it is clean and does not have that cast, and it looks freaking incredible for it. It does look wrong in some games, like you're like, wait a minute, that's off. In all the comparisons I've seen, I'm like, wait a minute, the color's not right to the other options, but I think it's actually the intended color output. There's also a presets menu where virtually every video setting can be saved as a preset, and they include a bunch of cool preset settings for different CRT emulations, with the goal being that any user should be able to make and upload their own presets to some sort of database for others to try and use. Hopefully they get to that point. Another setting that they're trying to implement, but it's not here yet, is game-specific settings. But this requires transmitting the game's ID from the console to the Retro GEM, which doesn't work yet. Discs don't seem to work at all, and OPL, the library for running games off a hard drive, doesn't support it yet either, though both of those things are being worked on and might come to fruition eventually. I hope so. That's always been a really cool feature of emulation. I would love to see it here. The Retro GEM includes bonus stuff like Wi-Fi to download firmware and other files, debug testing for your physical installation of the mod if you did it that way, a Snake minigame, among others. It's packed. This mod takes my favorite console of all time and makes it way more usable for everyone to play on modern displays, like the lovely LG OLEDs we've been talking about for the past few years, and stream, especially those who don't have crazy CRT gaming setups like me. Although if you do, you can still output the component from your PlayStation 2 to your CRT or composite or whatever, and run HDMI to your capture setup if that's how you want to do it. I do have a couple big complaints about this mod and a feature request or two, however. First, as it ships, mini HDMI is used instead of full-size HDMI. In some ways, mini HDMI is better than micro HDMI, but it's still a terrible connector. I don't even have that many mini HDMI cables compared to micro. Obviously, there are size constraints at play here. My PS2 Fat version here just utilizes the optical jack to replace it with HDMI, so they have a hole for it, though I have used the optical out for surround sound before in my setup, so that's now gone. But mini HDMI just in general sucks. I guess I'd rather lose optical and have mini than lose the component output and have full size. Second is the pricing setup. The console HDMI mod effectively has DLC. I think the healthier way to look at it is that you have the option to pay less to get it sooner and get it set up, and then you can pay a little more to get the rest of the features later, but it's a sucky situation regardless. The Retro GEM is segmented between basic and shiny editions, with the top selling features like 1080p and higher output and motion adaptive deinterlacing being locked behind the shiny edition. It's $120 for the basic and $190 for the shiny edition. Just budget for the shiny, treat it as a $190 purchase. That's all I can say. Lastly, my feature request would be some way to automatically trigger progressive scan and widescreen outputs for games that support it on the PlayStation 2. There's only a handful of these games, like the God of War series, but the PS2's history with progressive scan output is kind of messy. When working on a video a while back, I noticed there are some games, like everyone's favorite Sonic game, Shadow the Hedgehog, that only had 480p mode support in a specific release of the game, and not in the normal base original release that I had. And supposedly some games require button combinations at launch to enable 480p in the first place, kind of like GameCube games. It's a mess, and I have a link to a database for games that support what in the description, but it's a mess, and being able to globally just toggle it on would be great. As a bonus note, 1080i output from the 4 or so games that support it does not work with the Retro GEM, but you're not missing anything though. I have been waiting for this for a long time. I sent my community manager and backing track producer to Too Many Games back in 2019 to preview Dan's work on the PS2 HDMI mod at the time. And since then, PixelFX was founded with a group of the modders. They produced the PS1 HDMI mod to get that part of this mod working, and so on. But we're finally here, 4 years later. If only the PixelFX team wasn't dead set on nuking the reputation by needlessly going after Mike Chi over and over. Get your shit together, guys. I'll always be happy to see my favorite console get more love. I've got this bad boy powered up with a 2TB SSD full of games, my massive and expanding disc library behind me, Mem Card Pro for the PS1 with the PS2 model coming this fall, the 8BitDo wireless dongle, Gauntlet, Tekken, God of War, Smuggler's Run, Fatal Frame, Star Ocean. Life's pretty good. I kind of want a couple more modded PS2s like this for different setups, so I could have one in the house, one for streaming, and whatever. Would be nice. It's been a, well, gym playing all these games again to test it out. If you want to experience this, but the setup or mod all sounds like too much for you, then you have to click this video to see how emulating the PS2 compares to playing it on the console and whether that solution is better for you. Also, don't forget this video where I'm talking about the must-have, top games for PS2 that you should check out if you're looking for some inspiration. I'll probably be streaming a lot of this over on Twitch and on the Lost Saves YouTube channel later this week. Links below if you want to go follow there and check it out. Remember to be kind, rewind.